Hello. Super excited to kick off this session. I think we'll give it a couple of minutes for everybody to join and then we'll start.
Sounds great.
But yeah, as everybody join, feel free to share where you're turning in from. Then you can use the chat on the bottom right.
For those of you that are already joined, I'm happy to share here on the mic where I'm joining from. I'm in Northwest Arkansas in the U.S., in the Ozark Mountains.
Awesome.
Looks like we got Dan from Las Vegas. Welcome, Dan. Well, someone joining from your side of the world, Olga.
Yeah. I'm calling
Couple
from
people.
London, UK. So have Cambridge, UK. Awesome. Cool. One more minute and then we can kick it off. We also have somebody from Washington State. Fun. I think it's time for us to kick it off. So
Let's do it.
welcome everyone to our session. We're going to talk about how hotel service apartments can use insights and data to find what's really driving the revenue. And we're going to start with some introductions. My name is Olga, calling from London, UK. I'm leading marketing at Minute. And then as a speaker, we have Nathan today. He's the VP of Sales at Minute. And he spent years working closely with hotels, apart hotels, short-term rentals, helping them with some operational challenges, anything from noise monitoring to smoking to guest accountability to efficient stays. So he's very knowledgeable in this space and he has international experience. He's, as he mentioned, based in Arkansas. And yeah, we are very lucky to have him here today to share his experience and insights. So super stoked about the session. And for the agenda, we're going to discuss some of the key challenges, some of the insights that can be missed when reviewing basically your own operations, what's the best practices when tracking something, some of the real world examples, and how to be proactive rather than reactive. So I think, full agenda. And Nathan, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Olga. I appreciate it. As Olga mentioned, I've had the benefit of speaking with a ton of our customers over the years in this exact space. And so I think the benefit for me sometimes is I'm getting to hear both the horror stories and the success stories from many, many different styles of customers and in different markets. And it allows me, when I zoom out, to see some things that maybe sometimes aren't quite as obvious, even for people who are doing the job, right? They have had different experiences, but they haven't had all of these experiences. So it's nice to be able to take this accumulation of stories and experiences and to do what I can to turn around and share that back with people just like you to see if there's anything we can do to help you grow your bottom line revenue, which is the goal for today. So I think a good way to frame things is to kick it off with this question. Do you know what happens in your units when you're not there? So today's session will be focused a lot around having more control, more insight into things, honestly, whether you have guests or not at the time. And in most cases, assuming that it's in situations where you just simply can't always be there, right? Even if your properties are in a location where you live, which they may not be, but if they all are, you still can't be at each one all the time. So I think it's important for us to look beyond just the occupancy rates and notice that our revenue can be shaped by many things. As you see here on the list, you've got operational control, guest experience, risk management, noise and damage, and brand reputation. So as we move forward here, we're going to look at some of the common things that I hear from many of my customers or prospects about the challenges that they're facing, specifically in apart hotel style rentals, service departments, those sorts of things. As you can see here, there's a list of the first ones. We may dive into some that are even deeper than these, but what I hear often is that they have limited visibility inside the units. That's one of the key things we're going to talk about today. Because of this, they really don't have the real-time data that they sometimes need on guest behavior or even their neighboring guest behavior. The cleaners can sometimes miss something and that goes undetected. Similarly, maintenance delays can go unnoticed. And then a big one that we'll dive into is that guests can leave negative reviews even though they haven't complained to you before they've left that review. How can we overcome that and how can it make a difference to revenue? And then staff constantly reacting to problems. So we're going to talk a little about how can we be more proactive instead of just reactive in situations. Part of why I think it's important that we dive into those topics is really unified around this idea that there are many places where revenue slips through the cracks. We think a lot about occupancy rate. We think a lot about the cost that's going into running our businesses and what that does for the bottom line. But there are these other areas that, if missed, can have some pretty major impacts on revenue. Maybe you don't notice it today, especially if it's not something you've really been in control of over the past several years. But I think if you start to have more operational control over some of these things, you'll recognize that they actually have a bigger impact on revenue than maybe you even thought. So I've got a list here, obviously, of things like missed or poorly performed cleanings. It equals poor guest experience. That's pretty obvious. You all know that especially a missed cleaning is going to cause a very poor experience, but even a poorly performed one can cause poor experience. But how do we solve that, right? Noise disturbances. If one of the guests, maybe it's in an apart hotel style rental where both of these guests are yours, but one of them's being incredibly loud and that's disturbing the other guests next door. That's going to equal lower reviews. How do we solve for that? Late checkouts. We don't know if someone has already checked out or not. How does that affect turnover and how can we solve for that? Undetected damage, especially the longer that damage is allowed to occur, can create uncharged repair costs. And then all of that can result in reviews dropping, which we know very obviously affects future booking. In fact, I was just thinking about this over the weekend as my wife and I were booking some travel for a trip. It's actually our company offsite. So Minute, for those of you that don't know, is a company that does monitoring in units exactly like the ones that you probably manage. We're based in Sweden, so that's where our primary office is. And then we have offices in London as well, which is where Olga is based. And then the rest of us who are in places like North America or Spain, France are all remote. So every year we join together for an offsite retreat and bring the whole company together. It's always in Sweden. And so because it's a fairly far trip for me, I'm looking for, a way to extend that after the offsite. And I usually take some time to visit around Europe. So over the weekend, I was booking some of that. And the key thing that my wife and I were looking at were reviews, right? I think pretty obvious. Many of you probably look at reviews before you book. And we'll dive a little deeper later, but I think even the best property with the best photos, now of course this is more for short term especially, but this is true I think of all rentals. The best property with the best photos and the best location can still be hampered by just a few poor reviews. I don't know about you, Olga, when you're looking at a place to book, but for me, I'm usually reading a few longer reviews that are good, hopefully, but then I'll typically sort by negative as well and read a few of the negative ones to see if there's a correlation.
No, same for us. Me and my husband, whenever we try to book something, I just click the 1-star reviews first and then try to see if there is a theme across them. So because then if you find one, you kind of know that's an issue. So definitely,
Yeah,
the same. Yeah. And I think
exactly.
It's a great segue probably into our poll question.
Yeah, sure.
Let's
move forward there.
Okay, let's hear from the audience. How often do they encounter issues like smoking or noise disturbances in their units?
I see some answers coming in. Give a few more seconds here for everyone to answer. So you should have polls in the view that you have there with a few options. Are these things occurring regularly, occasionally, rarely, never? One answer for never, actually, which is great. I'm very, very lucky for whoever that is, that this isn't a common issue for you, which is great. Okay, it looks like most of you are on the occasionally train, which tracks. I think when I talk to my customers here at Minute, I'm hearing a lot of the same, right? That maybe this isn't something that they deal with every single day in every single unit. That would be terrible, but it is always this occasional issue, right? That's going to crop up whether we like it or not. There's a good example actually in one of the slides here from one of our customers, Bob W. So for those of you in Europe, you're probably familiar with Bob W. They run a lot of service departments and part hotel style rentals in Europe mainly. They came to us for one specific property in one city in the past, trying to solve for noise issues specifically. So we helped them put in place our Minute noise monitoring solution and some automated alerts that come along with that. So you can sync it with a property management system that you use, or you can import your guests in our system with the CSV import. And then using that data, if there is a noise alert, when the noise goes over a certain decibel level that you're able to set, they can get automated alerts via text or phone call. So we put this in place for them, and what they saw was an 83% reduction in issues after just the first message. So we have a series of messages that would normally go out that can be programmed in, but if the noise is reduced quickly, then only that first one would go out, and that's what happened 83% of the time. They would have noise issues, an automated message would go out, and then the person causing that noise would quiet down. So, of course, not only was that helpful in expediting the resolution of the issue, but that reduced negative reviews for those that were next door to these people causing the noise as well. So with that, they decided let's roll this out to more cities, and that's exactly what they've done. So systematically, they've added Minute to all, if not, or most, if not all, of their portfolio across many, many cities in Europe. And there's a nice quote here from them that says, Minute has saved us hundreds of possible complaints from neighbors. The response from guests has been overwhelmingly positive, primarily because we've built gentle, friendly text message automations, which are triggered when certain rules are met relating to decibel levels and duration of the noise. So even if the issue you're having is just occasional, I think what's nice about being more proactive is you can actually take it to the point where hopefully it becomes either a rarely, or maybe even like the lucky person who said never, that this is now essentially never an issue, because even just that gentle reminder is often enough. I think what I've noticed is that if we give guests the benefit of the doubt, most of the time they actually don't intend to be loud. And if we tell them, hey, you're being a bit too loud, they have no problem quieting down. And that's seen across more than just Bob W. Across our entire portfolio, that percentage of noise complaints that are resolved automatically after one automated message is actually closer to 90%. With that, I think it's important to look at how does this actually hurt the bottom line. And there's a couple here that I think are maybe eye-opening. Number one is 86% of people are less likely to recommend a hotel or any sort of short-term rental if they've had a bad noise-related experience. This resonates with me completely, because if I have a bad noise-related experience and I'm not able to sleep, which I'm a fairly light sleeper, I will absolutely not only not recommend it, but I will usually tell people, oh yeah, if you're going to this city, don't stay here, right? If there's a noise-related issue. The next here is that $700,000 is the estimated number of annual losses for properties with multiple negative reviews. So if you analyze a certain region and you see the properties that are in a very similar location, very similar price point, some have slightly lower reviews than the other, you can have up to $700,000 in annual losses in that type of scenario. So it makes such a big difference if you can just gain a few additional good reviews and limit those bad reviews. And then 30 potential customers can be driven away by a single negative review. This is especially the part that I think I couldn't resonate with more, especially after this weekend. We booked 4 separate locations because we're traveling to a few different areas. And a single negative review absolutely could have swayed our opinion on where we're staying. And if there's a plethora of choices, then it may not be that we viewed that property negatively just because of one bad review, but it was enough for us to say, well, this other one doesn't have any negative reviews, so let's book there because that other one at least has the one negative review weighing it down. So obviously it can have a very big impact on bottom line. So we talked about these issues, and you all mentioned that most of you said occasionally you're having them. I think another thing to consider aside from the reviews aspect is uncollected fines. One thing I hear a ton from my customers is we do occasionally try to charge for these things. The issue is that then if someone goes to their credit card company and files a dispute, and that credit card company comes to us saying, okay, you charged this extra cost or a deposit of some sort that wasn't refunded, you have to prove this now. That oftentimes they will err on the side of the customer, with that card, meaning your guest, and reverse the money, right? You lose it. So uncollected fines can be such a big issue, and the reason you can't win that dispute is because you don't have the proof, right? So this is one of the areas I think that could have the biggest impact in being proactive, because the average cost of an incident is around $1,100. When you're factoring in not only the cleaning you're going to have to do after a party, for instance, or a really, really bad smoking event, but then also the potential loss in the next booking if you have to move someone or if you end up having to cancel their reservation entirely. The average fine for smoking per incident we see is $200. $2 to $250 is what I see the most. But it almost doesn't matter what that number is if you can't win a dispute when it comes to a chargeback, right? And so because of that, 32% of fines are not collected due to lack of evidence. And I would say that number gets even worse when we factor in not only the ones that aren't collected on at all, but the ones that are charged back as well. It's tough to prove, especially with cigarette smoke, even more so than noise, I think, because even if you have a photo of ashtrays and cigarette butts and things like that, to prove that you've taken it in the time that the guest was there or right after they left is so difficult, right? And I think that this is the one that people come to us the most often saying, we've never had something that can prove it, that we can win a chargeback, and now we do. So it can make a big, big difference, having the ability to collect those fines more consistently. Another example we have here is a company called Berlin Apartments. They came to us with their mixed use rentals, and mostly it was because their neighbors were complaining of noise with the guest next door or the resident next door. They also had questions around, could we possibly know when someone's in the unit versus when they're not in the unit, which would help us speed up, our turnover. And so they put Minute in with those two problems in mind and started monitoring for noise, and then used our motion detection to know, is someone actively in the unit or have they already checked out? As a result, they've seen fewer complaints. That they don't get escalated to them because either they're resolved automatically or they're able to at least address the situation before a neighbor has to call and complain to them. This helped them maintain neighbor trust. And then, as I mentioned, with the motion detection, this allowed them to have faster guest turnaround. They could get in and clean faster. And so the quote they have here is, we can now have informed conversations with neighbors. If they complain, we can check the data. Often it turns out they were overly sensitive or the noise wasn't from our unit at all. This helps us prevent unnecessary conflicts and shows that we take complaints seriously. This brings us to our next poll question. Olga, if you'd like to help us out there.
Yeah, and for the audience, if they had a way basically to monitor in real time noise and cigarette smoke, would they think that it will help reduce them operational overhead and improve the overall guest satisfaction, i.e. less complaints?
I'll give some time for everybody to answer here.
Okay, we have some diverse answers there.
Mm-hmm. I think fair. We've got several definitely, a few possibly, a few not sure. Yeah, I think all very fair, right? You'll know your properties better than anyone. So for those of you that said definitely, I'm guessing you may be dealing with issues more often than some of the others. So you know the impact that it might have to have some real-time proactive monitoring. And then the possibly or not sure, that's why we're here, right? Is to explore. Are there things you can do? Of course, today we're talking about Minute. That's the solution that we offer. But I would hope that you all would know that we understand we're not the only solution. There are definitely other solutions out there that might solve for your exact problem, possibly even better than Minute can. So our goal as a company is to help people solve problems and have really good return on investment for the solutions that we provide. So possibly is a really good place for you all to be, I think. We'll move forward here and take a look at the correlations that I see as someone who, like I said, meets with a lot of diverse customers from different regions and with different types of properties. But there are some clear indicators of better control and the result that it has when you have better insight into your properties. The first is in guest behavior trends. So when you have proactive monitoring or some way of being able to spot problems either at the very, very beginning or at least as they're happening rather than retroactively, you see fewer issues with things like noise, smoking, and occupancy. Doesn't mean they won't still exist. Obviously, people will still do these things. But if you're able to solve for them proactively, it's a very clear benefit to the ROI at the end of the day. Another is unit level performance. You're able to actually go beyond just looking at problems, but you're able to utilize data from tools like Minute to see which units are performing well and which are underperforming, and then try to see, is there something we can do to improve this performance? A big one is the review to incident correlation, right? Because the one thing we see a lot is someone leaves a negative review, but they haven't even spoken to us. They haven't reached out. They haven't said there was a problem. It's just that after they leave, they're frustrated that there was a noise issue or someone smoking next door or something like that. And so they leave a negative review. So this is probably the biggest impact to revenue, is this correlation here. And then the last that you see there is cleaning completion and staff response time. So just being able to know, can we go in a little early? Can we get this cleaned, even quicker than we would have before, or clean a bit better? Because if we're rushed, obviously sometimes we don't have the time to do a proper cleaning or a cleaning that the guest is going to be very, very thrilled with. As an example of that proactive approach, here are two stories. So one night, two separate stories. What would it look like with monitoring and insight, and what would it look like without? So we see at the top here at 11 p.m. the party starts. That party continues and continues. At 2 a.m. someone begins smoking indoors. And then the next day we have a complaint from a neighbor. We have a cleaner that might be longer than they would normally be because they're having to deal with a much bigger mess than expected. And then we see reviews drop, both from the person next door, from the person that's coming in later because the property's not as clean as they hoped, or maybe they had a delay even getting in or had to be moved. All of that's probably fairly common when there's an incident like this if you don't have proper insight. Now, if you did, then possibly it could have gone more like this. 11 p.m. party starts, a noise alert occurs within 5 minutes, let's say, or 10 minutes, depending on what you've set up. An auto message goes out to the guest. And then in this example, it's 10 minutes later, the noise stops. Now, that could be because they're recognized right away, we're not going to get away with this party, let's move it somewhere else. Or maybe it wasn't a true party, like a rager, right? But it was just noise that would bother the neighboring guest without necessarily being something that would have caused big damage. Who knows, right? Let's say at 2 a.m. though, someone still decides I'm going to light up and smoke a cigarette. We're still up, we're having some fun. Maybe the noise is within reason, but I'd like to smoke a cigarette or marijuana or something like that. In this case, with monitoring, it could trigger an alert right away. So this tells you two things. Number one, if you're going to have to charge a fine for this smoking, you have the proof you need, but it also can inform your cleaning crew before they even arrive that this may be a situation where we need an ozone machine or we need some sort of additional cleaning. So perhaps I need to arrive early. So even if this isn't addressed immediately, you can at least address it with your cleaning crew in advance. So 9 a.m., maybe the cleaner is scheduled to be there a bit early. As a result, there's no damage. You're able to get it cleaned in time, and then you don't have a bad review. The difference, as I've mentioned a few times, is timing, right? Proactive versus reactive. To me, this is the thing that I hear every single time from customers who are having even just occasional issues. Implement something like Minute and maybe some other tools as well. And then we follow up later on to see how it's going. They always talk about the ability to be proactive is what has made the key difference here. If they can detect noise, smoke, occupancy issues, even temperature and humidity issues, which we also track for, if they can be proactive about those things, then it saves them time and it often saves them quite a bit of money. Similarly with the guest messages, like I said, giving the guest the benefit of the doubt, they often don't intend to be too loud. So even if it's 4 or 5 people just sharing a rental unit and they're having a game night or something very reasonable, and they're having a fun time, right? They don't intend to be so loud that they disturb their neighbor. So an automated message can improve the situation by just telling them, hey, if you can quiet down just a little, that would be helpful. And it removes that problem before it gets too far and escalates, right? And then it's really a matter of protection. A couple of my customers have dedicated safety teams, and they're the ones that tend to appreciate Minute the most because it protects the guest, it protects the property, it protects the neighbors from severe issues, but then also just from having a negative experience. And then it helps you flag risky units immediately. So if you see a recurring problem in a specific property, maybe there's something you can do to address it right ahead of time so that you can stop seeing this recurring issue. This actually brings us to our third poll question, which I want to say I really appreciate the participation here. It's great that you guys are giving your answers. So the question that we have here is, what would you find most valuable in a smart monitoring solution for your particular units? Some of the options you have here are proactive alerts for parties and smoking, data to support guest communication, reduce need for on-site checks, quick damage prevention, or maybe it's other. And if it's other, if you don't mind writing into the chat, that would be great. Would love to hear maybe what you're looking for the most, what you feel like would be most helpful. I'm going to give some time for those answers to come in, and I'm also going to review the chat here.
Yeah, I think we have a couple of questions coming in. Maybe we can address them in the Q&A session, and then if something is right away.
Okay, lots of good answers coming in. I see a couple others. So like I said, if you want to throw some examples into the chat, we can definitely talk about them here in just a moment in the Q&A section. All right. I'm assuming people have had time to answer. That poll should stick around. So even if you haven't decided just yet, feel free to still respond. But just to sort of review, basically, the proactive approach, from what I've seen, having worked with hundreds of our customers, it really does pay off. With the reactive approach, I mean, if your problems are so few, then you can maybe afford some reactive behavior, that I think that's fine and that's great. And I'm very happy for you that that's the situation you have with your properties. We genuinely would hope that everybody would have that situation, but we know the reality is often people won't be that lucky. So the proactive approach really does help. It reduces churn. That reduced churn means improved reviews. That ability to address something quickly obviously improves reviews. And then, as I mentioned, to me at least, very, very personally, those improved reviews are absolutely translating into higher occupancy. So one thing that I do hear sometimes when people are considering putting in a monitoring solution is it an invasion of privacy? Is it going to feel like an intrusion? What should I know before I put something like this in? I think it is important to check exactly how a device works before you put it into a rental unit, especially. In our case, I'll just let you know that we do provide real-time alerts, meaning this is connected to the internet. However, for things like noise, which is one of the biggest concerns people would have in terms of privacy, how does it work? For us, it's all edge computing, meaning everything's done on the device itself. We don't need to send audio, to our servers to process or anything like that. But quite literally, all we get from the device is the report of what's happening. In other words, what's the decibel level, right? So I know there are devices, smart home devices, that transmit audio to a server and process them and maybe send back a response, et cetera. That's not what's happening with Minute. It's very privacy forward. We're just getting the decibel alert, and then using that data, we can set up those automations that we talked about. Similarly, there's no camera. People talk about the circle that you see there on the face of the device and our use of motion detection. Does that mean there's a camera? Nope. It's a motion sensor only. So it's detecting motion events. And then our cigarette smoke detection uses machine learning. Most people aren't too concerned about the privacy there, but it's good to know that it does use AI and machine learning to try to weed out the types of smoke that you don't want an alert about, like burnt food or burnt toast or something of that nature. So the other things you see here, we can prevent parties or disturbances before they escalate. That's the key, right, for the visibility. And I think most people will appreciate that that's exactly why the device is there. They do understand that. And if they're there to be a good actor, then they won't mind. So if you do have someone that minds, it's probably because they have intentions that aren't great for your property. The other benefit with this type of visibility is that it helps you stay in compliance. So if you do have regulations about noise that can cause you to lose your license, then something like this can be very helpful, not only to address the noise, but then also to report back if you are getting complaints from a neighboring property that you don't manage and that risks you losing your license. You can prove that you were in compliance and that the noise didn't persist for too long. And then, of course, the respect for guest privacy is super important. I mentioned there are no cameras, no audio recordings, no data whatsoever about the guest, other than perhaps if you've connected it with a property management system, then their contact information as far as their phone number and the length of their stay, then that gets automatically removed as well. We'll move forward here to our next slide and talk a little bit about all of the things that we monitor here at Minute. We've talked a decent bit about noise and cigarette smoke, but just so that you see it very quickly, we also have a tamper detection alert. So I think I may have spotted a question in the chat that was related to this actually. If someone decides to tamper with the device, then you would get an alert right away. There's an occupancy monitoring that's specifically for crowds. So it's detecting using Bluetooth device count, how many devices are there. Of course, people will travel with multiple devices, so it's not meant to be a strict, one-to-one occupancy count, but rather to let you know that if they invite 10 people over, each of which is going to be bringing a phone, that number will start to spike. And so it can go over a threshold you've set to give you a crowd alert. I mentioned just briefly, we monitor for temperature and humidity. You can set high and low alerts there as well. So we have people in cold climates, for instance, that's come in super handy. If a heating unit breaks, they can know right away because they get a cold alert. Same for AC, if you get a hot temperature alert. You can also connect that with automatic thermostats. So if you have a smart thermostat, then you can set it so that a certain number of hours before a guest is due to check in, you can bring the temperature up or down as needed. There's an outdoor mode, so these do work outdoors. All of our devices are rated for indoors or outdoors. So if you have noise concerns primarily in the exterior part of your properties, then you can certainly use them outdoors as well. I mentioned briefly the motion detection. There's a mold risk analysis, which uses temperature and humidity over time to give you a mold risk. And then we have an alarm recognition feature as well that will listen out for things like a fire alarm or carbon monoxide alarm. So if that's sounding inside one of your units, we can let you know. So it turns, sort of an old school static alarm into something a bit smarter. So that's what Minute can do. If there's something else you'd like to learn about Minute more in depth, please do feel free to book in a demo and we can talk directly about your needs. In fact, if you know that's something you need, then feel free to click yes here and we'll know in the system who would like to receive one of those demos, and we'll reach out and get that booked with you. Otherwise, you can find a lot of information on our website, minute.com, as well. So feel free to tune in there for any upcoming changes or follow us on social media, since we post about our new features and updates there as well. And with that, we'll jump into some Q&A. Olga, I don't know if you have identified any good questions that we should address.
Yeah, I think there is a couple actually really good one in the chat. One of that is we need to detect windows open so we can turn the heating down. Can we do it, I guess, with Minute?
That's a good question. So we have actually had discussions about additional sensors and add-ons that we would add to the product in the future. So definitely follow us on social media and stay tuned there. But as far as detecting the shift in temperature, that's an easy way to do that now. I do have customers that do just that, where they'll use those temperature alerts I mentioned, since you can set a custom threshold, either high or low temperature, to let them know if there's a change that's resulted from someone leaving a window or a door open, for instance. Also, I think you'd be surprised, depending on where you are, which region you are, you'd be surprised with how much the humidity will change with that. So in the US, for instance, I have central heating and air here in my home, and the humidity is a very consistent level. And if I open the window here in my home office, it will be very obvious how quickly it changes. And so if I have my alerts turned on, I will definitely get an alert about it. So that's one way you might be able to detect that.
Awesome. And I have one question around, like, when you chat with your customers, what's one thing they thought that didn't matter until they actually saw the insights and data? It's kind of like a surprise.
Yeah, I think honestly, we've talked about it a little, but the biggest surprise is always how quickly things calm down with the automatic noise alert. That's always the thing I hear most often is, I knew it would be helpful to automate an alert of some kind, but I think we sometimes judge people a bit too harshly that if they're being loud, it's definitely on purpose. And so that's why I said it several times, because I think it is a surprise sometimes that people say, wow, we're seeing an 85 to 90% reduction in noise issues just from that automated alert. And part of the benefit of that, that's extra, I guess, is that it sort of makes us the enforcer rather than you. You don't necessarily have to reach out to them personally and say, hey, we've heard complaints that you're being too loud, and now they're frustrated with you as the manager. If this is coming from a system that's clearly automated, it sort of allows us to be the one enforcing that rather than you, and may not affect their opinion whatsoever of the actual manager. And so that can be super helpful as well for a review. On the flip side of that, sometimes people will utilize automatic language to try to sound like it's just coming from them as the manager, and they will say something like, we've gotten reports that the noise is too high. Now that report has come from Minute rather than a neighboring guest, which is great, but still a true statement.
Awesome. I have one follow-up question. So how many Minute units do you need for a large 2-bedroom, for example?
Good question. It usually less to do with the number of bedrooms and more about the overall square footage. So if your property is less than 900 square feet, then there's a really good chance you would just need one device. If it's bigger than that, then I would start to consider how many bedrooms and how many total rooms are made up in that square footage. So if it's something like 1,200, and there are 2 bedrooms, then it very well may be that 2 is perfect. The way that our subscription works is that you're paying for the service in that rental unit. And so if you need to add another device, this subscription isn't tied to the device itself. So if I have to have 2 in a specific unit because it's larger, I'm just paying an extra hardware cost for that added device, and it doesn't affect my subscription cost. So it's something you could add at any time if you find that you need a little bit of added protection in a larger unit.
Awesome. And I think probably have one more question.
Sure.
What trends are you seeing across like property operators? Anything specific?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a big trend in the apart hotel space in general. Like, it's growing. People are recognizing that having multiple units in the same building is a very big added benefit. So I think for those of you that are in that space now, then optimizing what you're doing is key. And then if you're not in that space and looking to grow in a particular area, then it's a really good way to have even more concentrated insight if you're managing obviously multiple rentals in the same building or in a series of buildings, one next to the other. Seems to be a really, really big trend. And for those of my customers that are doing exactly that, it really does seem to be growing and working well for them. I will say I do see some other great questions that I would love to address, and I know we don't have the time to do it today, but I'm going to go through these and I'll reach out to you all personally and make sure that we get your questions answered. And then, as I mentioned, for those of you that have said, yes, you'd like a demo, we'll definitely reach out and get that scheduled for you so that you can see things in action and see how it can solve your particular problem, whatever that may be. But with that, I want to thank everyone for their time. Thank you so much, Olga, for the help here and for hosting with me. And you can always reach us at hello@minute.com or visit minute.com on our website to review more and chat with us there as well. So thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.